Now, the International Monetary Fund once again says that India is a bright spot in an otherwise gloomy global backdrop. The January update to the IMF's World Economic Outlook shows that India's economic growth is projected to slow next year to 6.1% from 6.8% in the current year. But the IMF's chief economist says that India's growth outlook was left unchanged from their previous review in October. Robust domestic demand is likely to be the country's growth engine, even as external factors weigh in on the country's economic activity. India is set to, of course, unveil its budget tomorrow, and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says that the world's eyes on India's budget continue amid global uncertainty. He's also added that this budget will also be a bright spot for the shaky global economy. The Prime Minister was confident that the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman would live up to every expectation. The IMF's report card showed that growth in major Asian economies is expected to rise, with China emerging from its deeper-than-expected slowdown last year, which was driven by strict zero-COVID policies last year. China's GDP growth slowed last year to 3%, below the global average for the first time in more than 4 decades. The country, which is widely known as a global manufacturer, is now projected to rise 5.2% in 2023, reflecting the easing in COVID-related restrictions. The IMF's latest outlook showed that the global economic growth projected to fall to 2.9% in 2023 from 3.4% this year. But the latest global economic outlook is better than the predictions from just 3 months ago. And it says that both China and India together account for about 50% of global growth in 2023, which shows quite a different outlook between the prospects for India and the world, and also supports the IMF's statement about India being a bright spot amid all this doom and gloom. Now, to discuss this further, we still have Madan Sabnavis. He joins us from Mumbai. He is, of course, the chief economist at the Bank of Baroda. Just talking about this statement, Madan, we're likely to see a lot of announcements tomorrow once the budget is presented. A lot of expectations. You say that you are expecting a more predictable budget. Just talking about the global picture here, we understand that growth has slowed down, but India continues to be a bright spot amid talks of recession going into 2023. But the big question is, how will the government manage its finances?
See, that's the major issue for the government, because if we're talking of economic growth slowing down from 7% to, say, even 6.5% or 6%, and also with inflation coming very much under control compared to 22-23, when inflation tended to go out of hand for a larger part of the year. This would also mean that the overall tax buoyancy, which we witnessed last year. So if you remember, we were talking in terms of a run rate of 1.3 lakh crores in terms of GST collections. We have actually crossed 1.5 lakh crores, primarily due to the inflation factor. Now, with inflation coming down and even overall demand also slowing compared to 22-23, I think that kind of buoyancy will not be there. So I think that will be basically the ticklish issue for the government, that if your tax revenue is not going to be that buoyant, how do you actually manage bringing down the fiscal deficit ratio to, let's assume, we're bringing it down to something like 5.8% for the next year, which means that there will have to be a lot of work which has to be done on the expenditure side. And on the expenditure side, there is expectation from industry, at least, that the government will persist with higher capex, which means that the revenue expenditure will have to be controlled. And this is where they will have to play around with things like your subsidies, because they have been a big ticket for the government in the last couple of years. Some rationalization is expected on fertilizers, already been done for the food subsidy. So I think that's what they're really going to do. And at the same time, given the fact that we have elections coming up in 24, there would have to be probably something more towards the lower income groups, which may be provided in this budget.
Right. Just talking about some of the figures that have come out in the economic survey, right in line with the expectations. The survey projects a baseline GDP growth of 6.5% in real terms in FY24. Help our viewers understand what this figure means. I want to ask, is this good news or bad news?
To my mind, it's good news. I would say it's good news because we are still above the 6% mark. And even though it's a decline from 7% to, say, 6.5%, which means there is definitely weakening which is taking place in the economy, this would still be one of the highest numbers among all the larger economies. And India would definitely be a bright spot. So there's no doubt about it. But this said, I think the government is also cognizant of the fact that there are two problems which have been ailing the economy even before the pandemic. That is picking up of the pickup in private investment, as well as the creation of jobs. And I think these two will be high on the agenda of the government, not necessarily in the budget, but even outside the budget, through policies to ensure that these two engines also start running, so that we could actually reach that 5 trillion mark or the 7 trillion mark which we're talking of today in a shorter period of time.
Right, Madan, thank you so much for all those insights. We'll of course come back to you tomorrow as well once the budget is presented. Thanks for joining us today on WION. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.